On this Saturday night, COVID cases ramp up as some Canadian regions shut down. Tough new measures take effect to curb the spread. Political risk. Donald Trump speaks to hundreds at the White House just over a week after testing positive. A frightening spread of a different kind.
It's seen as a kind of threat to the nation.
Poland's anti-LGBTQ ideology grows, and how fear,
a lot of people were worried,
drove one of the most popular pandemic pastimes.
Global National with Robin Gill. Reporting tonight, Colleen Christie.
Good evening. Thanks for joining us. As Canadians alter their traditions this Thanksgiving weekend because of COVID-19, cases continue to soar in many parts of Canada. In Quebec, police checkpoints have been put up to help curb the spread, while in parts of Ontario, new restrictions are now in place as the province's death toll surpasses 3,000. Jeff Semple is following the developments tonight in Toronto. Jeff.
Colleen, people here in Toronto, in Ottawa, and next door in Peel region woke up this morning to a dreaded deja vu.
It is frustrating.
Global News first interviewed this Toronto restaurant owner last summer during the first wave in lockdown.
A second closure will be perhaps even worse for us.
Fast forward a few months, and his fears have been realized.
We risk worst-case scenarios.
Ontario now shuttering all indoor dining, movie theaters, casinos, and gyms in Toronto, Peel, and Ottawa. This gym invested thousands of dollars in air purifiers and plexiglass and just reopened its doors after being forced to close for 3 months.
So that's almost half a year of our income that's going to be gone.
They, like many others, are now shifting their service outdoors, keeping a nervous eye on the weather.
Last time that we spoke, we were heading into the summer, so we knew that we were going to be busy in the patio. Now we can only trade in the patio, but we know that we're going to the cold months.
The Ontario government now facing a chorus of criticism for not taking steps sooner to slow the spread.
We waited too long during the slow part of exponential growth. Now we're in the rapid part of exponential growth, so we have to do things harder.
Canada's largest provinces, Ontario and Quebec, have the highest number of cases, but the provincial picture per capita tells a different story, with Quebec, Manitoba, and Alberta topping the list.
I think within the city of Edmonton, we're starting to see the beginning of a second wave.
After Quebec and Ontario reimposed restrictions, experts worry Alberta could be next. Toronto has around 58 active cases per 100,000 people. Edmonton has 108. The Alberta government is relying on voluntary restrictions to limit gatherings in large groups, and Alberta's premier sounds a lot like Doug Ford did a couple of weeks ago.
We're not going to enforce our way out of this.
There was action taken with voluntary recommendations and guidelines. If that is not effective over the next 2 weeks, we may have no choice but to bring in more formal closures or restrictions.
In Canada's hardest hit province, meanwhile, police are enforcing the lockdown with checkpoints, ensuring Quebecers don't travel too far from home for Thanksgiving. And Ontario is also following Quebec's lead when it comes to the length of this latest lockdown. These restrictions will remain in place for at least the next 28 days. Colleen?
Jeff, thank you. 3 of 4 Atlantic provinces are reporting new cases today, and New Brunswick set another single-day record. The province reported 20 new cases, most of them in the province's 2 orange zones. 12 were in Moncton, where there's an ongoing outbreak at a long-term care home. 7 others are in the Campbellton area in the northern part of the province. Neighboring Nova Scotia has 3 new cases, but the provincial government says the infections aren't related to the outbreaks in New Brunswick. Prince Edward Island didn't report any new cases, but officials there have warned islanders against traveling to New Brunswick's orange zones over this weekend. And 3 people in Newfoundland and Labrador have tested positive. But those numbers are a small fraction of the more than 7.7 million infections in the U.S. since the pandemic began. Despite that, President Donald Trump, who has COVID-19, addressed another large crowd on the White House lawn today. As Jennifer Johnson reports, he's continuing to downplay his own illness and the risk of the virus.
Desperate to recharge his campaign, U.S. President Donald Trump hosted hundreds of supporters at the White House just days after being hospitalized for COVID-19. Some of the attendees were invited by the Blexit Group, a campaign urging Black Americans to leave the Democratic Party. The president spoke from an upstairs balcony. the spot where he took off his mask after returning from Walter Reed National Military Medical Center Monday night.
Our nation's going to defeat this terrible China virus, as we call it. And we're producing powerful therapies and drugs, and we're healing the sick.
The outdoor gathering, with few physically distancing, took place exactly 2 weeks after the Supreme Court nomination ceremony for Judge Amy Coney Barrett. Several people who attended that later tested positive for COVID-19, including the president and first lady.
We had a super spreader event in the White House, and it was in a situation where people were crowded together and were not wearing masks.
The president pushed for Saturday's event while still skirting the question of whether he has now tested negative for the virus.
But I've been retested, and I know I'm at either the bottom of the scale or free. It's really at a level now that's been great to see it disappear.
The president continues to downplay the threat of COVID-19 as the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention reports new cases have hit a 2-month high, with 10 states reporting record increases. On the campaign trail, Democratic candidate Joe Biden continues to blast the president for what he calls reckless actions.
I just read that the CDC was going to require masks on public transportation. 40,000 people a day are coming down with coronavirus, and the White House blocked it. What is the matter with this guy?
The president's campaign says it was not involved in planning this event, and several inside the White House were reportedly against it. But the president is not backing down in his battle to get reelected. A major rally is scheduled Monday night in Florida. Campaign officials say attendees will have their temperatures checked and encouraged to wear masks. Jennifer Johnson, Global News, Washington.
Today, President Trump received a phone call from Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, who wished him and the First Lady well in their recovery from COVID-19. The two leaders discussed ongoing efforts to manage the pandemic. This week, the Prime Minister warned Canada is at a tipping point. Mercedes Stephenson sat down with Canada's chief science advisor to get her take on the pandemic. Mercedes joins us now with what we can expect on the West Block this week. Mercedes.
Colleen, I spoke with Dr. Niemer for over 30 minutes to get to the bottom of some of our most pressing questions about COVID-19. On the vaccine, Canada's chief science advisor said that it could be available as soon as early 2021. That's just a few months away. On her advice to the government, Dr. Niemer says that scientists are being heard by politicians. We had a lot to talk about, so here's a sneak peek of what she had to say about the second wave of COVID-19 that much of the country now finds itself in the grips of.
You know, the second wave is gonna look what we are going to make it look like, meaning through our actions and what we do, because I think that we have everything in hand to make sure that the second wave is actually smaller and shorter than the first wave. It's a matter of following public health guidance.
COVID-19 has made us rethink the way we do, well, just about everything here in Canada. Justice Minister and Attorney General David Lametti joins us this week as well to talk about how the pandemic has impacted the courts and whether serious charges like murder could be dropped due to long delays in going to trial caused by the pandemic. Here's what he had to say.
The effects have been multiple in terms of the way a court can hear when it's an in-person session. If there's a jury trial, how do you space the jury? How do you empanel the jury in a safe way? How do you make sure that everybody who walks into that court building, from participants in the process, so the parties to a case, to the lawyers, to the judges, to the support staff, you have to make sure that the whole thing is functioning in a safe manner.
Former interim leader of the Conservative Party, Rona Ambrose, also joins us on the West Block this week. We'll talk to her about that sexual assault training bill now on round 3 of going through Parliament, as well as the view from Alberta when it comes to federal government pandemic spending. Colleen?
Thanks so much, Mercedes. People living along the Louisiana coast are assessing the damage from Delta. It blew ashore as a Category 2 storm last night before weakening as it moved further inland. There weren't any deaths blamed on the storm, but it brought flooding to some areas, ripped up trees and downed power lines. It knocked out electricity to about 25% of the state's power customers. The same area of Louisiana was already recovering from the impact of the much more powerful Hurricane Laura, which struck 6 weeks ago.
It affects you physically, mentally, psychologically, and then to turn around 6 weeks later and experience it again is pretty tough.
Delta was the 10th named storm to hit the mainland U.S. this hurricane season. That's a new record. Hurricane season doesn't officially end until November 30th. Coming up, a dangerous and growing ideology, Poland's anti-LGBTQ stance. And fighting resumes in the disputed Nagorno-Karabakh region following a short-lived ceasefire. Fighting appears to have resumed in the disputed Nagorno-Karabakh region just hours after Armenia and Azerbaijan agreed to a ceasefire. The Russian-brokered deal was scheduled to start today, but both sides are already accusing each other of breaking the truce. The Moscow talks were the first diplomatic contact between the two countries since fighting began nearly 2 weeks ago. Nagorno-Karabakh is internationally recognized as part of Azerbaijan, but it's governed by ethnic Armenians. Poland is also getting international attention right now for all the wrong reasons. This year, at least 100 communities have declared themselves LGBT-free zones. Dozens of countries, including Canada, have condemned the action. Now, at least one Canadian organization that helps LGBT people escape persecution and violence is expecting people to flee Poland. Mike Drolet explains.
With every wave of the rainbow flag, Poland's LGBT community fans the flames of those who hate them. Groups of right-wing nationalists like these just don't want to see it anymore.
According to our faith, according to our traditions, and according to nature. It's a nature to be LGBT.
It's an ideology that's spreading. Town councils in over a third of the country have passed resolutions declaring themselves anti-LGBT zones. They're unenforceable because it's not illegal to be gay, but LGBT activists are afraid of what might happen next.
LGBT people cannot count on Polish government because they targeted us and show us to the people as a public enemy.
The European Union has tried to put pressure on the Polish government to step in, but Polish President Andrzej Duda doesn't appear to be listening. He wants to ban schools from teaching anything about LGBT issues, and he compared the movement to communism, an emotional trigger for many in Poland.
The basic idea is that somehow LGBT people represent a threat to a kind of traditional values or particular forms of the family, and in the way in which Polish nationalism presents itself these days, it's seen as a kind of threat to the nation.
The idea of a threat is what's fueled the growth of right-wing nationalism in Europe. Extreme right-wing parties are either active and growing, already winning seats in parliament, or running governments outright. Gay rights in Poland are considered among the weakest in Europe. While same-sex relationships are legal, there are no protections for hate crimes or hate speech. And the Rainbow Railroad, which helps LGBT people escape persecution and violence, is expecting a spike in requests to help leave the country.
That's when they usually come to us for help, when essentially folks are criminalized within their towns and local communities and cannot rely on any sort of protection from the state.
Given the presence of the remains of Nazi concentration camps in the country, many observers are surprised the Polish government is enabling those who are so willing to persecute a minority group. Mike Drolet, Global News.
Still ahead, the technology making sea travel safer, cheaper, and greener.
You're watching Global National.
North Korea's military might was on display today during a rare pre-dawn parade. It featured a previously unseen intercontinental ballistic missile. Experts say it would be one of the largest in the world if it becomes operational. The parade was held to mark the 75th anniversary of the country's ruling party, but North Korea typically uses events like this to show off new weapons. It's not just socializing we're doing from a distance these days. Military and commercial drones have revolutionized how we see and navigate our planet. In the next decade, sea vessels without crews could do the same for the worldwide shipping industry, potentially making it safer, cheaper, and greener. Redmond Shannon visited one UK manufacturer on the cutting edge of sailor-free marine technology.
The USV Max Lemur is back on dry land. During a recent 3-week mission surveying the Atlantic seabed, the Uncrewed surface vessel pushed new boundaries of maritime technology, all controlled from this room back at base in the east of England.
Over the course of the 22 days, we managed to survey over 1,000 square kilometres. The intention of the project itself was to go out and prove how this vessel will handle in true ocean conditions for longer periods of time. So we were off there for 22 days.
The mission was actually a Plan B. Plan A was to attempt a historic unmanned transatlantic voyage from Nova Scotia to England until COVID-19 made the logistics impossible.
The USV Max Lemur will fit in a single 40-foot container. That single 40-foot container can be shipped anywhere around the world for tens of thousands versus a mobilization which can go up to $1 million just to mobilize a vessel.
The production and operating costs are also a fraction of conventional surveying vessels.
Uncrewed ships are about more than just economics and efficiencies. The technology could have an impact on the carbon footprint of the wider shipping industry.
Right now, the industry has a similar-sized emissions impact to aviation. As this technology develops, freighters won't need bulky accommodation, potentially making them smaller and lighter.
On top of that, we start to have crew. When you are operating in the Gulf of Mexico and you've got crew from all around the world, you need to fly them out there. And each of those flights has its own carbon footprint.
Surveying company Fugro has just ordered 2 vessels to deploy its underwater vehicles for oil and gas pipeline inspections.
At the moment, there's no regulation in place for uncrewed operations.
The company is working with authorities to set out new rules to govern the future of unmanned sea travel.
What we are facing now actually is this transformation supported by all the technologies that we have at hand at a super high speed. It's big fun to work on this and to work on this change. But it's massive. It's massive.
Meanwhile, another project named the Mayflower aims to use artificial intelligence systems for an uncrewed transatlantic crossing next year. Redmond Shannon, Global News, Talsbury, England.
No suitcase, no passport, no problem for passengers on board a Qantas Airlines flight to nowhere. 150 people boarded a plane in Sydney only to return a few hours later. Qantas sold a sightseeing tour over Australia's landmarks to help boost the ailing airline. Each seat was snapped up in about 10 minutes with a first-class ticket costing nearly $4,000. Critics say the flight isn't worth the environmental cost. Up next, what we're learning about the modern version of the Victory Garden. There's enthusiasm for you. These little guys are literally jumping at the chance to be part of this competition. It's the first ever Canadian Regional Dog Diving Championship. Dogs are enticed to run the length of a dock and leap as far as possible into the water. They're judged on height and distance.
It's very exhilarating, and I know that he's having a lot of fun and happiness when he does it.
Sure looks like it. Competitors would normally travel to Florida for the competition, but because of the pandemic, 9 regional competitions are being held across the continent in search of the top dogs. I think he should win. Well, while you may have dug in for the fall and winter, some new stats are in for a springtime pandemic phenomenon, the rise in the popularity of gardening, particularly vegetable gardening. While it served as a great way to fill time at home, as Ross Lord reports, that's not why a lot of people took it up.
Backyard gardens like this one in the Halifax area are popping up all over Canada. For many, it's a way to finally indulge their green thumbs.
We've wanted to do gardening for quite a while, and we've always said it in the years gone by, but with COVID,
we really thought this is the time.
An online survey of 1,000 Canadians by Dalhousie University researchers shows the trend is widespread.
We found that 51% of our respondents grow at least one fruit or vegetable at home, which is, it surprised us.
The report says 17% of home gardeners started this year during the pandemic. 67% of those new gardeners say the pandemic influenced their decision. And the report suggests there's a fear factor. More than half of respondents expressing at least some worry about food shortages during COVID-19.
I wasn't really scared food would no longer be available, but there's that little bit of, we should be trying to grow some of our own food anyway. And that's to be more sustainable.
There's such an explosion in home gardening, the federal government now has a website with safety instructions on canning food.
When the pandemic first broke out in March, a lot of people were worried, especially greenhouses and garden centers, that this would be a year where, some maybe would have gone out of business, it wouldn't be busy. But instead, we saw gardeners, so many new gardeners, a lot of people come back to gardening.
An upside to the pandemic that's literally growing. Ross Lord, Global News, Windsor, Nova Scotia.
That is Global National for this Saturday. I'm Colleen Christie. Tonight's Your Canada is a horse's eye view of the village of Innisfree in Alberta. We love showcasing your part of Canada. Email your photos to viewers@globalnational.com. Thanks for watching. Hope you'll join us again tomorrow. Good night.